Hi guys, welcome to my channel experience arc. My name is Becky and I am super excited to start this channel. I kind of came up with this idea to educate people and to help people learn more about mental health and mental disorders and to learn more about what it all even is. A majority of people to some point in their life will experience mental illness themselves and have to figure it out. They have to know how to take care of themselves. And as easy as it seems to be able to take care of ourselves, a lot of times it's not. And a lot of times you do need help, and it's okay to get help. And this channel here is all about educating people. This first series that I'm going to be doing, which this video is actually going to be the introduction, the part 1 to this series. And this series is geared around mental disorders from the DSM. We're gonna kind of go through them. What is the simplest definition for this kind of disorder? And we're also going to talk about the actual diagnostics that are needed for someone to be diagnosed with this disorder. And we're going to talk about what this disorder actually is, what the day-to-day life would look like for someone with this disorder. And we're going to talk about kind of the myths that are around this disorder and debunk them. Today we are really going to talk about psychopathology. What it is, what it means, and why it's important. Psychopathology is defined as the subfield of psychology devoted to the study of mental disorders. Another common term people flip between psychopathology is abnormal psychology. Although that seems like a simple enough definition to understand, and you guys are kind of like, well, the video's over. It's not. There's a lot more to unpack here. So to understand abnormal psychology or psychopathology, we need to understand the core concepts: context, continuum, cultural historical, advantages, limitations, causality, and connection. The context in which abnormal behavior occurs is important for 3 crucial reasons. The first crucial reason is that understanding the context surrounding abnormal behavior is crucial in diagnosing it. For an example, if someone was to lose a friend or family member and you see symptoms of intense sadness or lethargy, maybe denial or anger, then that behavior really isn't abnormal due to the context surrounding it. But if you have the absence of that context, you have the absence of that tragedy, and they still show these symptoms of intense sadness, lethargy, denial, anger, then that's a little bit abnormal. The context surrounding the behavior is really what helps in determining if it really is abnormal or normal. To the second reason that context is so crucial to psychopathology, and that is the context in which abnormality occurs helps us to understand it and to explain it. So if we can see the context around a behavior allows the behavior to be normal. So like the example that I said, a friend or family member passes away. You're probably going to be sad. And that's normal behavior. That's a normal response to a tragedy like that. It's very normal to feel intense sadness when you're grieving and when you're in bereavement. When that occurs, people from the outside that know that context can understand why you're sad. They can understand your feelings and to an extent sympathize with you. And when we do understand something, it's a lot easier to explain it. We can't really explain behavior if we have no idea why someone's acting that way. The last crucial reason for context in abnormal psychology is that abnormal behavior is influenced by demographic contexts, and those are sex, gender, age, culture, ethnicity, etc. So any demographic on a person is part of demographic context. Paying attention to these demographic contexts are very important when it comes to bias. when we pay attention to demographic context, we are also paying attention to those biases. Because the reality of it is that whoever someone is, it's not their demographics, it's not their race, their gender, their religion. That's a part of who they are, but who they are as a person, and if they're nice or sweet or mean or rude, has absolutely nothing to do with any of that demographic context. So really, you want to see that person behind that. You want to be able to get to know them. On top of that, it also helps us to recognize differences between people and how to help people in different ways. Demographic context is extremely important, on top of also knowing the surrounding context of their life when it comes to handling mental illnesses and handling psychopathology and handling people around you. So we just finished talking about context. Now I want to go into continuum, and when I say continuum, I'm talking about the continuum between normal to abnormal behavior. So the easiest way that I think about this is I think about it like a color continuum from white to black, and there's gray in the middle. And in this continuum, you can't pinpoint exactly where white is, exactly where black is or begins and ends, and where gray begins and ends, because it all flows into each other, right? It's a continuum. It's not easily placeable. And that's kind of like behavior. Behavior isn't easily, this is normal, this is abnormal. Because if it was, this field would be so much easier to understand, and it would be so much easier for people to know what behaviors are when it comes to abnormality. Is it abnormal? Is it not abnormal? Do we even know? So realistically, we do need to recognize the fact that abnormal behavior and normal behavior flows into each other. And obviously, as we talked about before, context is also dependent on that. So, we can't really sit here and say this is abnormal because it's a continuum. Different behaviors can be normal at different times, and different behaviors can be abnormal at different times. We need to embrace the fact that it is a continuum, and it changes, and things change. Sadness can be normal. It can be, I promise you, sadness can be normal. And it can also be abnormal at times. And part of this is sitting in the gray area. And many people are uncomfortable with it, but I promise you, it's not hard. You just gotta sit there and kind of enjoy it and take it in. So we just finished talking about continuum. Now I want to move into cultural historical. So cultural historical is really referring to the cultural and historical relativism of abnormal psychology or psychopathology. For example, definitions in this field have changed a lot over time, and how we view different previous disorders has changed a lot over time as well. So an amazing example of this is homosexuality. Homosexuality used to be a term commonly used in the DSM, and it used to be a diagnosable disorder. Since 1973, homosexuality has no longer been in the DSM, meaning it is no longer a mental disorder, and today it is commonly considered a normal variant of human sexual behavior. Abnormal behavior also varies over different cultures, which is where we get cultural relativism. For example, some cultures may think that it's okay for someone to talk to someone who is passed. Some cultures believe that is abnormal behavior, and they believe that's not how things are done, right? So it's abnormal behavior in those cultures, and cultures really do differ with behaviors and differ with how they deal with different life events. Understanding that helps us to understand whether or not this behavior is abnormal to them. If someone has a different culture than you, you might recognize it as normal, and they might recognize a behavior as abnormal, and vice versa. We cannot make absolute universal statements on what normal behavior is. So now that we've talked about cultural historical relativism, I'm going to jump to advantages and limitations. And when I say advantages and limitations, I'm discussing the advantages and limitations of abnormal psychology. Clinicians and researchers essentially need classifications of mental disorders to be able to study them and diagnose them and discuss them between other professionals and scientists. But classifying mental disorders can be very complex, especially since these classifications need to be reliable and valid. Complexity of abnormality and abnormal psychology has made it extremely hard to be able to classify things in a reliable and valid fashion. Even so, too much emphasis on classifying behaviors can at times oversimplify what is really very complex issues. And this can also keep us from fully understanding the people behind the diagnosis. This whole field, as much as we love to talk about all of the different diagnoses, all of the different information out there, it really is also about people and about the human experience. Even so, diagnoses of mental disorders can be very, very stigmatizing and dehumanizing to those that are diagnosed with it. So it's a weighing system. We have to weigh the advantages against the limitations. There's advantages to having a diagnostic system, but there's limitations for the people being diagnosed. So next we're going to talk about causality. Causality refers to the principle of multiple causality, which the easiest way to think about this that I usually think about it is there's never one cause for anything. It really has precipitating and predisposing causes when it comes to it. So precipitating is usually, you know, kind of triggering causes. Precipitating would be like something happened and then they had some form of mental illness or lack of mental health. They had issues after this happened. Predisposing is more likely to be something like biological causes. We have to remember that there's multiple reasons that people can have mental illnesses and mental disorders. It's very rare for there to be only one reason. Usually it's a mix of different things going on. Even so, many different theoretical perspectives really do kind of live in abnormal psychology, and that can be psychodynamic perspectives, cognitive, behavioral, biological. And today we're taking a lot more of an eclectic view because it rarely ever is just cognitive or just behavioral or just biological. It's usually a mixture of a few different things. When I say connection, I'm referring to the connection between the mind and the body. Previously, there was the belief that the mind and the body were separate realms and they were not tied together. But today there's much scientific proof and a lot of information out there that does indicate that the mind and body are intertwined. One of the biggest ways to understand this is when it comes to emotions. Our emotional experiences alter brain chemistry, and there's proof of that. The same way that there's proof that brain chemistry alters our emotional experiences. So they work together. Although these core concepts remind us that psychopathology or abnormal psychology is all about defining diagnoses and classifying them and how we define abnormal versus normal behavior, it also reminds us that this field really is ultimately about people and ideas, and that's kind of where we need to start. I hope this video was really helpful in explaining psychopathology and giving you guys kind of a basis, and I hope it really does help you guys as we continue this series and I talk more about secular disorders. Stay tuned for next week, as next week we are going to start talking about anxiety disorders. Next Monday is when I will be posting the next video. I'm going to be posting every single Monday on this channel as we go through this series and creating a community geared towards mental health awareness and education. Please like, give me a big thumbs up, subscribe. Bye guys.